My name is Victoria Chen, and I am 28 years old. What I am about to share with you will fundamentally challenge everything you believe about marriage, loyalty, and the extraordinary resilience that emerges when someone refuses to accept abandonment as defeat. 3 years ago, my husband left me stranded at LaGuardia Airport with our 6-week-old daughter, our luggage, and exactly $47 in cash. He drove away believing he had destroyed my life forever. Last month, he watched in stunned silence as my private Gulfstream G550 landed at that same airport, with me emerging as the CEO of a company worth over $50 million. This is the story of how the most devastating betrayal of my life became the catalyst for success beyond anything I had ever imagined possible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The foundation of my story begins in Seattle, Washington, where I built what I believed was an unshakable partnership with the man I thought would be my lifelong companion. I met David Morrison during my final semester at the University of Washington, where I was completing my degree in international business with a specialization in supply chain management. David was pursuing his MBA at the same institution, focusing on corporate finance and investment banking. Our relationship developed naturally through study groups, shared academic interests, and a mutual appreciation for strategic thinking and ambitious career goals. David possessed the kind of confident charisma that made people gravitate toward him in both academic and social settings. He was articulate, well-dressed, and had an impressive ability to command attention during classroom discussions and networking events. His background included a privileged upbringing in Bellevue, where his father managed a successful real estate development firm, and his mother served on the boards of several charitable organizations. David spoke fluent Mandarin and Spanish, had studied abroad in both Shanghai and Barcelona, and carried himself with the assured demeanor of someone who had never experienced significant setbacks or financial uncertainty. My own background was considerably more modest, but equally driven. I was the daughter of immigrants from Taiwan, who had arrived in the United States with limited resources but extraordinary determination to provide educational opportunities for their children. My father, James Chen, worked as an engineer for Boeing while simultaneously completing his American professional certifications. My mother, Linda Chen, managed the administrative operations of a small import-export business while raising my younger brother and me with an unwavering emphasis on academic excellence and personal responsibility. The Chen family philosophy centered on 3 fundamental principles that shaped every aspect of our household dynamics. First, education was viewed as the most reliable path to economic security and social mobility. Second, hard work and persistence could overcome almost any obstacle if applied consistently over time. Third, family members supported each other unconditionally while maintaining high expectations for individual achievement and character development. These principles guided my academic development throughout high school and college. I graduated valedictorian from my high school class, earned a full academic scholarship to the University of Washington, and maintained a perfect grade point average while working part-time to cover my personal expenses. My specialty in supply chain management emerged from a combination of natural analytical ability and genuine fascination with the complex systems that enable global commerce to function efficiently. During my junior year, I completed an internship with a major logistics company that managed distribution networks for several Fortune 500 retailers. The experience revealed both the enormous complexity of modern supply chains and the significant opportunities for optimization that existed within these systems. I became particularly interested in how technology could be leveraged to improve transparency, reduce costs, and enhance reliability across multi-stage distribution processes. My senior year independent research project focused on developing predictive analytics models that could anticipate supply chain disruptions before they occurred. The project required extensive collaboration with industry professionals, advanced statistical analysis, and the creation of software prototypes that could process real-time data from multiple sources. The completed research earned recognition from both university faculty and industry experts, with several companies expressing interest in licensing the analytical frameworks I had developed. David and I began dating during the spring semester of my senior year, when we were both selected for a prestigious business case competition that required teams to develop comprehensive strategic plans for actual companies facing complex operational challenges. Our team was assigned to analyze the international expansion strategy for a mid-sized technology firm that was considering entry into Southeast Asian markets. The project required months of intensive research, financial modeling, market analysis, and strategic planning. David's expertise in corporate finance complemented my knowledge of international supply chain management, creating a partnership that proved highly effective in both academic and personal contexts. Our team's final presentation received the highest evaluation in the competition, earning recognition from a panel of judges that included senior executives from major Seattle-based corporations. The success of our collaboration in the business case competition revealed both our professional compatibility and our shared vision for building careers in international business. David's ambition was to establish himself in investment banking, eventually specializing in financing for multinational corporations expanding into emerging markets. My goal was to build expertise in global supply chain optimization, with the long-term objective of starting a consulting firm that could help companies navigate the complexities of international distribution networks. Our relationship developed with the kind of strategic planning that characterized our academic approaches. We discussed career timelines, geographic preferences, and the practical considerations involved in building dual professional careers while maintaining a strong personal partnership. David would complete his MBA and secure a position with a major investment bank, ideally in their international division. I would pursue entry-level opportunities in supply chain management, gaining experience with progressively larger and more complex distribution networks. The timeline we established suggested that within 5 to 7 years, we would both have sufficient experience and professional credibility to consider entrepreneurial ventures or senior corporate positions that would provide the foundation for marriage and family planning. We approached our relationship with the same analytical rigor that we applied to business strategy, believing that careful planning and strategic decision-making would enable us to build both professional success and personal happiness. Following graduation, our plans proceeded exactly as we had outlined. David secured a competitive position with Goldman Sachs in their Seattle office, focusing on corporate finance for technology companies seeking expansion capital. I joined the supply chain management team at Microsoft, where I was responsible for optimizing distribution networks for their enterprise software products across Asian markets. Our respective positions provided excellent learning opportunities while offering compensation that enabled us to maintain a comfortable lifestyle in Seattle. David's role involved extensive travel to meet with clients and evaluate investment opportunities, while my responsibilities required regular communication with vendors, distributors, and logistics partners across multiple time zones. Despite demanding schedules, we maintained a strong relationship characterized by mutual support for each other's career development and shared enthusiasm for our professional achievements. After 18 months of dating, David proposed during a vacation to Maui that we had planned to celebrate our respective promotions within our companies. The proposal was thoughtfully executed, taking place at a restaurant where we had enjoyed our first formal dinner together as a couple. David presented me with an engagement ring that reflected both his financial success and his understanding of my preferences for elegant simplicity over ostentatious display. Our engagement period lasted 14 months, during which we planned a wedding that would accommodate both families while reflecting our shared values and aesthetic preferences. The ceremony took place at a boutique hotel in downtown Seattle, with a guest list that included family members, close friends, and several professional colleagues who had become important parts of our social network. The wedding itself was a sophisticated affair that balanced traditional elements with personal touches that reflected our individual backgrounds and shared interests. My parents contributed traditional Chinese tea ceremony components, while David's family arranged for a string quartet and professional photography that captured the elegance of the occasion. The reception featured cuisine that honored both cultural traditions, while accommodating the diverse dietary preferences of our guests. Our early married life established patterns that seemed to validate our strategic approach to relationship building. We purchased a condominium in a desirable Seattle neighborhood that offered convenient access to both of our workplaces while providing space for entertaining and potential future family expansion. David continued advancing within Goldman Sachs, earning recognition for his analytical skills and client relationship management abilities. I received increasing responsibilities at Microsoft, eventually leading a team that managed supply chain optimization for their fastest-growing product lines. Our professional successes created opportunities for international travel, both individually and together. David's work required frequent trips to evaluate investment opportunities in emerging markets, while my responsibilities involved establishing partnerships with distribution networks across Asia and Europe. When our schedules permitted, we would coordinate travel to explore new destinations together, viewing these experiences as both personal enjoyment and professional development opportunities. After 3 years of marriage, we began discussing the possibility of starting a family. Our financial situation was stable, our careers were progressing according to plan, and we had established the kind of partnership that seemed well suited to the challenges of parenthood. David was particularly enthusiastic about the prospect of becoming a father, often speaking about his desire to provide his children with even greater opportunities than he had experienced during his own privileged upbringing. The decision to start a family represented a natural progression of our carefully planned life together. We approached pregnancy planning with the same strategic thinking that characterized our other major decisions, consulting with healthcare professionals, optimizing our financial preparations, and discussing how we would balance parenting responsibilities with our career commitments. When I became pregnant during our 4th year of marriage, both families responded with tremendous excitement and support. David's parents immediately began discussing their plans for grandparent involvement, while my parents expressed their joy through increased attention to traditional customs associated with pregnancy and childbirth. The prospect of welcoming our first child seemed to strengthen our relationship while providing additional motivation for continued professional achievement. My pregnancy proceeded smoothly, with David demonstrating remarkable attentiveness and support throughout the experience. He accompanied me to every medical appointment, researched optimal nutrition and exercise approaches, and took primary responsibility for preparing our home environment for the baby's arrival. His enthusiasm for fatherhood was evident in his careful selection of baby furniture, his detailed research into child development principles, and his frequent discussions about the educational opportunities we would provide for our child. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. During the final trimester of my pregnancy, David's behavior began to shift in ways that I initially attributed to normal anxiety about becoming a first-time parent. He seemed more stressed about work deadlines, more concerned about our financial obligations, and occasionally distant during conversations about our future plans. When I asked about his increased anxiety, he would explain that he was feeling additional pressure to advance his career before the baby arrived, wanting to ensure that he could provide adequately for our expanding family. These explanations seemed reasonable given the magnitude of the life changes we were approaching. First-time parenthood represents a significant transition that can create stress even in the most stable relationships. David's increased work focus and occasional emotional distance appeared to be normal responses to the responsibility he was preparing to assume as a father and primary breadwinner. Our daughter Emma was born in early March, after a labor and delivery process that proceeded without complications. David was present throughout the birth, demonstrating the same supportive attention that had characterized his approach throughout my pregnancy. His emotional response to meeting his daughter was profound, with tears of joy and expressions of love that seemed to confirm his commitment to being an engaged and devoted father. The first few weeks of parenthood presented the typical challenges of sleep deprivation, feeding schedules, and adjustment to dramatically altered daily routines. David took 2 weeks of paternity leave from Goldman Sachs, during which he shared responsibility for nighttime feedings, diaper changes, and household maintenance tasks. His involvement during this period reinforced my confidence in our partnership and our ability to successfully navigate the demands of parenthood while maintaining our professional commitments. However, as David's paternity leave concluded and he returned to his demanding work schedule, subtle changes in his behavior became more pronounced. He seemed increasingly impatient with the disruptions that a newborn inevitably creates in household routines. He would express frustration when Emma's crying interrupted his phone calls or when feeding schedules conflicted with his work commitments. While these reactions were not entirely unreasonable given the adjustments required by new parenthood, the frequency and intensity of his irritation suggested deeper concerns about how our changed circumstances were affecting his lifestyle and career priorities. My own adjustment to motherhood was proceeding more smoothly than I had anticipated. While the physical demands of caring for a newborn were certainly challenging, I found myself adapting naturally to the rhythms of feeding, sleeping, and nurturing that Emma required. Microsoft had provided generous maternity leave benefits, allowing me to focus entirely on recovery, and early bonding without immediate pressure to return to work responsibilities. During Emma's 6th week of life, David announced that his company was sending him to evaluate a potential acquisition opportunity in Los Angeles. The trip would require him to be away for 4 days, during which I would be managing Emma's care independently for the first time since her birth. While I felt confident in my ability to handle this responsibility, David seemed unusually anxious about the travel requirements and the impact on our family routine. The night before his departure, David's behavior was particularly distant and preoccupied. When I attempted to discuss logistics for his trip and our communication schedule while he was away, his responses were terse and seemed to reflect more stress than the situation warranted. I attributed his demeanor to work pressure and the natural difficulty of leaving his newborn daughter for the first time. What I did not realize was that David's Los Angeles trip would become the catalyst for a betrayal so profound that it would completely shatter my understanding of our marriage, our future, and his true character. The foundation of trust that I had built over 5 years of relationship with David was about to be tested in ways that would reveal the enormous difference between the man I thought I had married and the person he actually was beneath his carefully maintained facade. The strategic planning, mutual support, and shared vision that had characterized our relationship were about to be exposed as one-sided investments in a partnership that existed primarily in my imagination. The lessons I was about to learn about trust, resilience, and my own capacity for independence would prove far more valuable than anything I could have gained from the comfortable life I thought we were building together. The person I was before David's betrayal would be forever changed by the experience that was about to unfold. However, the strength I would discover within myself would ultimately create opportunities for success that exceeded anything I could have achieved within the limitations of our marriage. The foundation was about to crumble, but from its ruins, I would build something far more substantial and enduring than anything David and I had ever planned together. David's return from Los Angeles marked the beginning of behavioral changes that would gradually reveal the fundamental instability beneath our seemingly solid marriage. His 4-day business trip had proceeded according to schedule, with regular phone conversations that maintained our usual pattern of communication about work developments and Emma's daily routines. However, the man who returned from that trip carried himself with a subtle but unmistakable shift in demeanor that I would later recognize as the first visible sign of decisions he had already made about our future. The most immediate change involved David's relationship with Emma and his approach to the practical demands of newborn care. During the weeks leading up to his Los Angeles trip, he had demonstrated genuine engagement with feeding schedules, diaper changes, and the various soothing techniques required to manage Emma's fussy periods. While he had occasionally expressed frustration with the disruption to his sleep and work routines, his overall commitment to shared parenting responsibilities had seemed consistent with our pre-birth discussions about how we would balance childcare duties. Following his return, however, David's participation in Emma's care became increasingly minimal and grudging. When Emma cried during the night, he would remain in bed while I handled the feeding and comfort routines. When I asked him to take responsibility for specific care tasks during weekend mornings, he would comply with obvious reluctance and frequent comments about his need for adequate rest to maintain his professional performance. His previously enthusiastic discussions about Emma's development and milestone achievements became perfunctory responses that seemed designed to end conversations rather than engage with the substance of her progress. This withdrawal from active parenting was particularly puzzling because David had previously spoken with genuine excitement about his role as a father and his desire to be actively involved in Emma's upbringing. During my pregnancy, he had researched child development principles, purchased educational toys and books, and frequently discussed his plans for teaching Emma various skills as she grew older. The contrast between his pre-birth enthusiasm and his post-trip disengagement suggested either a fundamental misunderstanding of what parenting would actually require, or a deliberate decision to minimize his involvement in our daughter's daily care. The second significant change involved David's attitude toward our shared financial responsibilities and household management. Throughout our marriage, we had maintained a collaborative approach to budgeting, major purchases, and long-term financial planning. David's higher income from Goldman Sachs meant that he contributed a larger percentage of our household expenses, but we had always made financial decisions through joint discussion and mutual agreement about spending priorities and saving objectives. After his Los Angeles trip, David began expressing concerns about our financial situation that seemed disproportionate to our actual circumstances. He would question routine purchases like groceries and household supplies, suggesting that we needed to reduce expenses in preparation for the increased costs associated with raising a child. When I pointed out that we had prepared financially for Emma's arrival, and that our budget accommodated the additional expenses she would create, David would respond with vague references to economic uncertainty and the importance of maintaining larger cash reserves. These conversations were particularly confusing because our financial situation had actually improved since Emma's birth. David had received a performance bonus from Goldman Sachs in recognition of his successful completion of several major client transactions. My maternity leave was fully paid, meaning that our household income had not decreased during the period when our expenses were highest. Our savings account contained more than sufficient reserves to cover any unexpected costs related to Emma's care or medical needs. David's sudden concern about money seemed to reflect either a dramatic change in his risk tolerance or considerations that he was not sharing with me. When I attempted to discuss specific aspects of our budget that might benefit from adjustment, he would deflect the conversation or claim that his concerns were based on confidential information about market conditions that he could not discuss due to his professional obligations. The third area where changes became apparent involved David's work schedule and his availability for family activities. Throughout our marriage, David had maintained demanding professional hours, but he had also made consistent efforts to protect time for our relationship and shared interests. Weekends typically included activities we both enjoyed, such as hiking, visiting museums, or exploring new restaurants. David would also arrange his travel schedule to minimize conflicts with important personal events or activities we had planned together. Following his return from Los Angeles, David's work commitments seemed to expand significantly. He began leaving for the office earlier in the morning and returning later in the evening. Weekend work became more frequent, with David claiming that his current projects required extensive research and analysis that could not be completed during normal business hours. When I suggested that we plan activities together as a family, he would express concern about his workload and suggest that we postpone plans until his current projects were completed. The expansion of David's work schedule coincided with his increased use of his personal phone for what he described as client communications. Previously, David had handled most of his professional calls through his office phone or company-issued mobile device. However, he now frequently received calls on his personal phone that required him to step outside or move to another room for privacy. When I inquired about the nature of these calls, David would explain that they involved sensitive client information that required confidential handling. While David's explanations about increased work demands and confidential communications seemed plausible individually, the cumulative effect of these changes created a pattern of reduced availability and emotional distance that had not previously characterized our relationship. The man who had once prioritized our shared time and actively participated in household responsibilities was becoming increasingly absent and disengaged from the daily reality of our life together. The fourth significant change involved David's communication patterns and his responsiveness to discussions about our future plans. Throughout our marriage, we had maintained regular conversations about both short-term logistics and long-term objectives. We would discuss career developments, financial goals, travel possibilities, and various aspects of our personal and professional growth. These conversations had always been characterized by David's active engagement and his thoughtful contributions to our planning processes. After his Los Angeles trip, David's participation in these discussions became noticeably different. When I raised questions about returning to work after my maternity leave, he would provide minimal responses that seemed designed to end the conversation rather than explore the practical considerations involved. When I discussed potential modifications to our living arrangement that might better accommodate Emma's needs, David would express vague agreement without engaging with the specifics of what changes might be beneficial. Most concerning was David's response to conversations about our long-term family plans. Previously, he had spoken enthusiastically about the possibility of having additional children and had participated actively in discussions about timing, financial preparation, and logistical considerations. When I broached these topics after his return from Los Angeles, his responses became evasive and non-committal. He would suggest that we should focus on adjusting to life with Emma before making decisions about expanding our family further. This change in David's communication style was particularly troubling because our ability to discuss complex issues openly had been one of the foundations of our relationship. From our initial collaboration on academic projects through our career planning and marriage preparation, we had always been able to address challenging topics through direct conversation and mutual problem-solving. David's sudden reluctance to engage with important family decisions suggested either a loss of interest in our shared future or concerns that he was not prepared to discuss openly. The fifth area where changes became apparent involved David's social behavior and his interaction with our extended network of family and friends. Throughout our marriage, David had maintained positive relationships with my parents and had actively participated in family gatherings and celebrations. He had also been engaged with our mutual friends and had often taken initiative in planning social activities that included other couples with whom we shared common interests. Following his Los Angeles trip, David's participation in social activities became increasingly minimal. When my parents visited to meet Emma and spend time with our new family, David's interaction with them was polite but distant. He would make brief appearances during their visits, but would often excuse himself to handle work-related calls or complete projects that he claimed required immediate attention. His previously warm relationship with my parents seemed to have been replaced by a formal cordiality that suggested obligation rather than genuine affection. David's behavior toward our friends followed a similar pattern. When couples we knew invited us to dinner or suggested family-friendly activities that could include Emma, David would typically decline or suggest that I attend without him. His explanations usually involved work commitments or fatigue from his demanding schedule, but the frequency of these declinations suggested a deliberate withdrawal from our social circle rather than temporary scheduling conflicts. The cumulative effect of these changes was to create increasing isolation for our family unit and to place greater responsibility on me for maintaining relationships with both family members and friends. David's reduced participation in social activities meant that I was often explaining his absence and managing the social dynamics that had previously been shared responsibilities. During Emma's 8th week of life, I attempted to address the changes I had observed in David's behavior through a direct conversation about our relationship and his apparent withdrawal from family responsibilities. I chose a weekend morning when Emma was napping, and David appeared relaxed and available for serious discussion. My approach was careful and non-accusatory, focusing on my observations and my desire to understand how I could better support him during what I assumed was a period of adjustment to fatherhood. David, I have noticed that you seem more stressed and distant since returning from Los Angeles, I began. I understand that becoming a parent involves major adjustments for both of us, but I want to make sure we are communicating effectively about any concerns or challenges you might be experiencing. David's response was defensive in a way that surprised me. Rather than acknowledging the changes I had observed or engaging with my invitation to discuss his concerns, he immediately challenged my characterization of his behavior. I do not think I have been distant, he replied. I have been working hard to provide for our family and to manage increased responsibilities at work. If you are feeling overwhelmed with Emma's care, we can discuss hiring additional help, but I do not think it is fair to suggest that I am not fulfilling my obligations. His response was troubling for several reasons. First, it mischaracterized my concerns as complaints about being overwhelmed, rather than observations about changes in his engagement with our family. Second, it suggested that his primary obligation was financial provision, rather than active participation in parenting and household responsibilities. Third, it deflected discussion away from his emotional availability and toward practical solutions that did not address the fundamental issues I had raised. I attempted to clarify my concerns and to invite more open communication about his experience of our changed circumstances. I am not suggesting that you are not providing financially, I explained. I am concerned about the emotional distance that seems to have developed between us. You seem less interested in spending time together as a family, and you appear to be avoiding conversations about our future plans. David's response to this clarification was even more defensive and dismissive. Victoria, I think you are overanalyzing normal adjustments to a major life change, he said. Every new parent experiences stress and fatigue. I am managing my responsibilities as effectively as possible under challenging circumstances. Perhaps you should focus on adapting to your own new role rather than monitoring my behavior. This conversation marked the first time in our relationship that David had responded to my concerns with outright dismissal and deflection rather than engagement and problem-solving. His suggestion that I was overanalyzing the situation and his recommendation that I focus on my own adaptation rather than our relationship dynamics represented a fundamental departure from the collaborative approach that had previously characterized our communication. The failure of this conversation to produce meaningful dialogue or resolution confirmed that the changes I had observed were not temporary adjustments to parenthood, but rather indications of more fundamental shifts in David's priorities and commitment to our marriage. However, I was not yet prepared to consider the possibility that these changes reflected a deliberate plan to distance himself from our family in preparation for abandoning us entirely. During Emma's 9th and 10th weeks of life, the pattern of David's disengagement accelerated. His work hours extended further, his participation in household responsibilities became virtually non-existent, and his interaction with Emma was limited to brief moments when her needs did not conflict with his personal priorities. Phone calls that required privacy became more frequent, often occurring during times when family activities were planned or when Emma required attention. Most significantly, David began making references to upcoming business travel that would require extended periods away from home. He mentioned potential trips to New York, Chicago, and San Francisco that could involve several days or even weeks of absence. When I asked about the necessity of these trips and their impact on our family routine, David would emphasize the importance of the business opportunities they represented and suggest that my concerns about his travel schedule reflected a lack of understanding about the demands of his professional advancement. The increasing frequency and duration of David's planned travel created practical challenges for managing Emma's care, while also raising questions about his priorities and commitment to our family. A new father's willingness to accept extensive travel assignments seemed inconsistent with the engaged parenting role he had previously expressed enthusiasm about fulfilling. As Emma approached her 6th week of life, David announced that Goldman Sachs was sending him to evaluate a major acquisition opportunity that would require him to spend 2 weeks in various California locations, including Los Angeles, San Francisco, and San Diego. The scope and duration of this assignment exceeded any business travel he had previously undertaken during our marriage. When I expressed concern about managing Emma's care alone for 2 weeks while still recovering from childbirth, David's response revealed the extent to which his priorities had shifted away from our family's needs. This is an important career opportunity that could significantly advance my position within the firm, he explained. The client specifically requested my involvement because of my track record with similar transactions. I cannot turn down this kind of assignment without damaging my professional reputation. His characterization of the trip as a career opportunity that he could not decline suggested that his professional advancement had become more important than his responsibilities as a new father. The man who had once balanced work demands with family commitments was now presenting those responsibilities as mutually exclusive choices where work would consistently take priority. The foundation of trust, partnership, and shared commitment that had supported our marriage for 5 years was cracking in ways that I was only beginning to perceive. The changes in David's behavior represented not temporary adjustments to parenthood, but systematic preparation for a betrayal that would shatter everything I believed about our relationship and force me to discover strengths I never knew I possessed. The 2-week period of David's extended California business trip marked a turning point in my understanding of both my own capabilities and the true nature of my marriage. Managing Emma's care independently during those 14 days revealed reserves of strength and competence that I had not previously recognized, while David's behavior during his absence provided increasingly clear evidence that fundamental deceptions were occurring beneath the surface of our relationship. My initial concerns about handling Emma's care alone for 2 weeks proved to be unfounded. The daily routines of feeding, sleeping, and nurturing that had seemed overwhelming when shared with David became manageable and even satisfying when I assumed complete responsibility for them. Without the tension created by David's reluctant participation and frequent expressions of frustration, the household atmosphere became more peaceful, and my confidence as a mother grew substantially. Emma responded positively to the consistency of having a single caregiver who was fully present and emotionally available. Her sleep patterns improved, her feeding became more regular, and her general temperament seemed calmer than it had been during the previous weeks, when David's stressed energy had permeated our home environment. The experience of successful solo parenting provided concrete evidence that I possessed the skills and resilience necessary to care for my daughter effectively, regardless of David's level of participation. During the first week of David's absence, our communication followed the pattern we had established during his previous business trips. He would call each evening to discuss his work progress and inquire about Emma's daily activities. These conversations were cordial but notably brief, typically lasting no more than 10 or 15 minutes before David would explain that he needed to attend client dinners or complete preparation work for the following day's meetings. The brevity and superficiality of these conversations represented a significant departure from our normal communication patterns during previous separations. When David had traveled for business in the past, our phone conversations would often extend for 30 minutes or more, covering everything from detailed work developments to personal observations about the cities he was visiting. We would share thoughts about current events, discuss books we were reading, and maintain the kind of intellectual connection that had been central to our relationship since our university days. The current conversations lacked this depth of engagement and personal connection. David's inquiries about Emma seemed perfunctory rather than genuinely interested, and his responses to my updates about her development were polite but emotionally flat. When I attempted to extend our conversations by sharing observations about Emma's emerging personality traits or amusing incidents from our daily routines, David would acknowledge my comments briefly before redirecting the conversation toward practical matters or explaining his need to conclude the call. During the second week of David's trip, the frequency and quality of our communication deteriorated further. Phone calls became irregular, sometimes occurring very late in the evening or not at all on certain days. When we did speak, David seemed distracted and impatient, often claiming that client demands were requiring him to work exceptionally long hours that left little time for personal communication. The explanations David provided for his reduced availability began to include inconsistencies that raised questions about the accuracy of his descriptions of his work activities. On one occasion, he mentioned attending a client dinner that would prevent him from calling until very late. But when he did call later that evening, background noise suggested he was in a casual environment rather than a business setting. When I asked about the client dinner, David's description of the event was vague and seemed to contradict details he had mentioned earlier about the nature of his meetings. Another inconsistency emerged when David described his travel schedule within California. He had initially explained that the acquisition evaluation would require him to visit multiple locations sequentially, spending several days in each city to conduct comprehensive due diligence activities. However, his daily updates suggested that he was spending more time in Los Angeles than his original itinerary had indicated, while his visits to San Francisco and San Diego appeared to be much briefer than the thorough analysis work he had described would require. When I asked for clarification about these apparent changes to his schedule, David's responses were evasive and defensive. He would claim that client needs had required modifications to his original plans, or that the complexity of the acquisition evaluation had necessitated more extensive work in certain locations. However, his explanations lacked the specific details about business processes and analytical requirements that typically characterized his descriptions of complex transactions. The most significant inconsistency involved David's descriptions of his work team and client interactions. Throughout his career at Goldman Sachs, David had consistently provided detailed accounts of his colleagues' contributions to major projects and his collaborative relationships with client representatives. These descriptions had always included specific names, professional backgrounds, and insights about the dynamics that influenced successful deal negotiations. During his California trip, David's references to team members and clients became notably generic and impersonal. He would mention meetings with the acquisition team, or client representatives, without providing the specific details that had always characterized his previous accounts of complex business relationships. When I asked about particular individuals he had mentioned in earlier conversations, David would claim that confidentiality requirements prevented him from discussing specific people involved in the transaction. This explanation was particularly puzzling because David had never previously cited confidentiality concerns as a barrier to sharing general information about his professional interactions. While he had always been appropriately discreet about sensitive financial details and strategic information, he had regularly discussed the professional qualifications and working styles of colleagues and clients in ways that provided context for his work challenges without compromising confidential information. The pattern of inconsistencies and evasiveness in David's communication during his California trip created growing unease about the truthfulness of his explanations for his extended absence. However, my suspicions remained focused on the possibility that his work situation might be more stressful or complicated than he was willing to admit, rather than on the potential for fundamental deception about the nature of his activities. During the second week of David's absence, I decided to conduct some independent research to better understand the acquisition opportunity he was evaluating. My background in supply chain management had provided me with familiarity with corporate databases and industry analysis resources that could offer insights into major business transactions occurring within specific sectors and geographic regions. Using my access to professional databases through my Microsoft account, I searched for information about significant acquisition activities involving Goldman Sachs clients in California during the time frame of David's trip. The search parameters I established were broad enough to capture various types of transactions, while specific enough to identify deals that might require the level of extensive due diligence that David had described. The results of this research were troubling and confusing. While Goldman Sachs was indeed involved in several California-based transactions during this period, none of the publicly available information suggested acquisition evaluations that would require the extended on-site presence that David had described. Most of the transactions appeared to involve financial restructuring or public offering preparations that would typically be managed through Goldman Sachs offices in New York or San Francisco, rather than requiring extended travel to multiple California locations. More concerning was the absence of any acquisition opportunities that matched the scope and complexity that David had described when explaining the importance of his assignment. The transactions I could identify through public sources appeared to be either smaller deals that would not require senior analyst involvement, or larger transactions that were being managed by different Goldman Sachs divisions with different staffing requirements. This research raised the possibility that David's descriptions of his California assignment had been deliberately misleading or entirely fabricated. However, I recognized that my access to information about Goldman Sachs activities was limited, and that confidential aspects of major transactions might not be reflected in publicly available sources. The apparent inconsistencies could potentially be explained by the sensitive nature of early-stage acquisition discussions that had not yet been disclosed through normal business reporting channels. Despite these rational explanations for the discrepancies I had discovered, the combination of David's changed communication patterns and the lack of corroborating evidence for his described work activities created sufficient concern to warrant additional investigation. I decided to contact David's assistant at Goldman Sachs to verify basic details about his travel schedule and expected return date. The conversation with David's assistant, Jennifer, provided information that significantly heightened my suspicions about David's truthfulness regarding his California activities. When I called to confirm David's expected return date so that I could plan airport transportation, Jennifer's response indicated confusion about the nature and duration of his current assignment. "I do not have David scheduled for any extended travel this week," Jennifer said when I explained the purpose of my call. "His calendar shows several local client meetings, but nothing that would require overnight travel. Are you sure about the dates of his California trip? This response was shocking and completely inconsistent with David's detailed descriptions of his 2-week acquisition evaluation assignment. I attempted to clarify the situation by providing the specific dates and locations that David had mentioned, but Jennifer confirmed that her records showed no extended travel arrangements during that time frame. "Let me double-check with his team lead about any special assignments that might not be reflected in his regular calendar," Jennifer offered, apparently recognizing my confusion and concern. After a brief hold, she returned with information that further contradicted David's explanations. "I spoke with Sarah, who manages David's current project assignments," Jennifer reported. "She confirms that David is not involved in any California acquisition evaluations during this period. His current focus is on a technology sector analysis that is being conducted entirely from our Seattle office. I am not sure where the confusion about California travel might have originated." The discovery that David's extended absence was not related to any legitimate Goldman Sachs business assignment represented a devastating blow to my trust in his honesty and created urgent questions about his actual activities during the previous 2 weeks. If David was not in California for work purposes, then his daily phone calls and detailed descriptions of client meetings and analytical work had been elaborate fabrications designed to conceal his true activities and location. The implications of this deception extended far beyond simple dishonesty about travel plans. David's willingness to construct and maintain such sophisticated lies suggested a level of calculation and premeditation that was incompatible with any innocent explanation for his behavior. The man I had trusted completely had demonstrated a capacity for sustained deception that called into question everything he had told me about his work activities, his priorities, and his commitment to our marriage. Following my conversation with Jennifer, I attempted to reach David by phone to confront him with the contradictory information I had discovered. However, my calls went directly to voicemail, and David did not respond to my messages requesting an immediate callback to discuss an urgent family matter. This lack of responsiveness was particularly troubling, given that David had consistently maintained availability for important communications during previous business trips. Over the following 24 hours, I made multiple attempts to contact David through phone calls, text messages, and emails. Each attempt went unanswered, creating a communication blackout that had never occurred during any previous separation. David's complete unavailability was inconsistent with his claimed work activities and suggested that he was deliberately avoiding contact rather than being occupied with legitimate business responsibilities. During this period of failed communication attempts, I began conducting more extensive research into David's activities and whereabouts. Using the location sharing features we had previously established on our mobile phones, I discovered that David's phone was indeed in the Los Angeles area, consistent with his claimed travel location. However, the specific locations indicated by his phone's GPS data did not correspond to business districts or hotels where corporate meetings would typically occur. Instead, David's location data suggested that he was spending significant time in residential neighborhoods and entertainment areas that would be more appropriate for personal activities than business meetings. The pattern of his movements throughout each day indicated a lifestyle of leisure and social activities rather than the intensive work schedule he had described during our phone conversations. The most disturbing discovery emerged when I used social media research techniques to investigate David's activities more thoroughly. Although David was not particularly active on social media platforms, I was able to search for references to his presence in Los Angeles through mutual connections and location-based posts that might provide additional information about his activities. This research revealed photographic evidence that contradicted every aspect of David's explanations for his California trip. Multiple social media posts from other individuals showed David participating in social activities, dining at expensive restaurants, and attending entertainment events in the company of people I did not recognize. Most significantly, several photographs clearly showed David in the company of a woman who appeared frequently across multiple posts and social settings. The woman in these photographs was consistently positioned in ways that suggested an intimate relationship rather than a professional or casual social connection. In several images, she and David were holding hands, embracing, or displaying other forms of physical affection that were unmistakably romantic in nature. The frequency of her appearance across different social events and the comfortable familiarity evident in their interactions indicated a relationship that had clearly been developing over an extended period. The discovery of photographic evidence documenting David's romantic involvement with another woman during his supposed business trip represented a complete betrayal of our marriage vows and a devastating confirmation that his recent behavioral changes had been motivated by his pursuit of an extramarital relationship. The elaborate lies about work travel had been constructed to provide cover for an affair that appeared to be far more than a casual indiscretion. The sophistication of David's deception suggested that his affair had been ongoing for a considerable period, likely predating Emma's birth and possibly extending back months into my pregnancy. His recent withdrawal from family responsibilities and his reduced emotional availability now appeared to be deliberate strategies for creating distance that would facilitate his pursuit of this other relationship while maintaining the appearance of committed marriage. The realization that David had been conducting an affair throughout some of the most vulnerable and important periods of my life, including Emma's birth and my recovery from childbirth, created a combination of rage, grief, and determination that I had never previously experienced. The man I had trusted with my future and my daughter's welfare had been systematically betraying us while accepting our love, support, and financial partnership. However, Alongside the emotional devastation of discovering David's infidelity, I experienced a growing sense of clarity about my situation and my options. The strength I had demonstrated during his absence, my successful management of Emma's care, and my ability to uncover the truth about his deception provided evidence that I possessed the skills and resilience necessary to build an independent life for myself and my daughter. The investigation that had revealed David's betrayal had also demonstrated my capacity for strategic thinking, thorough research, and decisive action under pressure. These were precisely the qualities that would be essential for navigating the challenges ahead and creating opportunities for success beyond anything David and I had planned together. The foundation of our marriage had been irreparably damaged by David's choices, but from its ruins, I was beginning to envision possibilities that would prove far more valuable than the comfortable but limiting life I had imagined we were building together. The final 3 days before David's scheduled return from California became a period of intense strategic planning and emotional preparation that would prove crucial to my ability to navigate the confrontation that lay ahead. The photographic evidence of his affair and the systematic deception regarding his business activities had provided devastating clarity about the true nature of our marriage, but they had also revealed opportunities for action that I might not have recognized without this comprehensive understanding of his betrayal. My first priority involved gathering and organizing all available evidence of David's infidelity and dishonesty in a manner that would be both legally useful and personally empowering. The social media photographs, location data, and contradictory information from his office represented just the beginning of what could be a comprehensive documentation of his deceptive behavior. My background in analytical research and data management provided a systematic approach to evidence collection that would prove invaluable in the coming weeks. I created a detailed timeline that correlated David's claimed activities with the actual evidence of his whereabouts and companions. This analysis revealed that virtually every aspect of his supposed California business trip had been fabricated, from the initial client meetings to the daily work activities he had described during our phone conversations. The sophistication of his deception indicated planning that extended far beyond a spontaneous extramarital encounter, suggesting instead a deliberate strategy to maintain our marriage while pursuing an alternative relationship. The timeline analysis also revealed patterns in David's behavior that provided insights into the duration and development of his affair. By correlating his recent changes in work schedule, communication patterns, and emotional availability with the photographic evidence of his activities in Los Angeles, I could trace the evolution of his relationship with this other woman back at least 6 months, potentially extending into the period of my pregnancy with Emma. This extended timeline of deception was particularly devastating because it indicated that David had been systematically lying to me during some of the most vulnerable and important periods of my life. His apparent commitment to our marriage during my pregnancy and his enthusiastic participation in preparing for Emma's birth had been performance rather than genuine engagement. The man who had held my hand during labor and expressed tears of joy at our daughter's birth had already been emotionally invested in building a life with someone else. However, alongside the emotional impact of understanding the scope of David's betrayal, the evidence I had gathered provided substantial advantages for the difficult conversations and decisions that lay ahead. The comprehensive documentation of his dishonesty would prevent him from attempting to minimize his actions or shift responsibility for the failure of our marriage. More importantly, the evidence established a clear pattern of deception that would be relevant to any legal proceedings related to child custody or financial settlements. My second priority involved developing a strategic approach to the confrontation with David that would protect both my emotional well-being and my practical interests. The anger and grief I felt about his betrayal were natural and justified responses to his actions, but allowing these emotions to dominate our interaction could compromise my ability to make sound decisions about my future and Emma's welfare. I spent considerable time analyzing the various approaches I could take when David returned, evaluating each option based on its likely effectiveness in achieving my objectives while preserving my dignity and protecting my long-term interests. The direct confrontation approach would involve immediately presenting him with the evidence of his affair and demanding explanations for his behavior. This approach would provide emotional satisfaction, but might also create defensive responses that could complicate future negotiations about custody and financial arrangements. The strategic disclosure approach would involve revealing my knowledge of his deception gradually, allowing David to compound his dishonesty through additional lies while I gathered further evidence of his willingness to deceive me. This approach would strengthen my position in future legal proceedings but would require me to endure additional emotional stress, while maintaining the pretense of believing his fabrications. The immediate separation approach would involve informing David that I knew about his affair and that our marriage was over, then requesting that he remove himself from our home while we determined the practical arrangements for divorce and child custody. This approach would provide clarity and immediate relief from the tension of living with someone who had betrayed my trust, but it might also precipitate hasty decisions that could be disadvantageous in the long term. After careful consideration of these alternatives, I decided to pursue a hybrid approach that would combine elements of strategic disclosure with clear boundaries about acceptable behavior. I would confront David with sufficient evidence to make denial impossible, but I would also use the conversation to gather additional information about his intentions and his level of commitment to maintaining our marriage. This approach would provide valuable insights into his decision-making process while preserving my options for how to proceed based on his responses. My third priority involved making practical preparations for the possibility that my confrontation with David would result in immediate separation or demands for divorce. While I hoped that our conversation might lead to honest discussion about the problems in our marriage and potential paths toward reconciliation, the evidence of his systematic deception suggested that such an outcome was unlikely. The extent of his emotional investment in another relationship and his willingness to construct elaborate lies to conceal his behavior indicated decisions that were probably irreversible. I consulted with a family law attorney to understand my rights and options regarding child custody, spousal support, and property division in the event that David chose to pursue divorce rather than attempt to repair our marriage. These consultations provided crucial information about the legal framework that would govern our separation and helped me understand which types of evidence would be most valuable in protecting Emma's interests and my own financial security. The attorney emphasized the importance of documenting David's income, our shared assets, and any evidence of his spending on extramarital activities that could be relevant to financial settlements. She also explained that Washington state's community property laws would provide substantial protection for my interests, but that the specific terms of any agreement would depend heavily on the quality of evidence I could provide and the negotiating positions that each party adopted during the process. These legal consultations reinforced the value of the systematic approach I had taken to evidence gathering, while also highlighting additional areas where documentation would be beneficial. I began preparing comprehensive records of our financial situation, including bank statements, investment accounts, property valuations, and David's employment compensation. This information would be essential regardless of whether our marriage survived the current crisis or proceeded toward formal dissolution. I also made practical preparations for managing Emma's care and my own living situation in various scenarios that might emerge from my confrontation with David. While our condominium provided adequate space for our current family configuration, the possibility of separation raised questions about whether this arrangement would continue to be feasible or desirable for Emma and me. My research into alternative living options revealed several possibilities that could provide both practical advantages and emotional distance from the memories and associations of our shared home. A smaller apartment in a family-friendly neighborhood could reduce my housing costs, while providing access to playgrounds, libraries, and other resources that would benefit Emma's development. Alternatively, temporary relocation to be closer to my parents could provide both financial support and assistance with childcare during the difficult period of adjustment to single parenthood. The fourth priority involved preparing myself emotionally and psychologically for the range of responses that David might offer when confronted with evidence of his betrayal. The man I had thought I knew would have responded to such a situation with honesty, accountability, and genuine remorse for the harm his actions had caused. However, the extensive deception I had discovered suggested that David's actual character might be significantly different from the person he had presented throughout our relationship. I prepared myself for the possibility that David would attempt to deny the evidence, minimize the significance of his affair, or shift responsibility for our marriage problems to my behavior or my response to parenthood. Each of these responses would require different strategies for maintaining my emotional equilibrium while protecting my interests and Emma's welfare. I also considered the possibility that David might express genuine remorse and request an opportunity to end his affair and rebuild our marriage. While such a response might seem to offer hope for preserving our family unit, the systematic nature of his deception raised serious questions about whether meaningful trust could ever be restored between us. The willingness to construct and maintain elaborate lies over an extended period indicated character issues that extended far beyond a temporary lapse in judgment or commitment. The psychological preparation for this confrontation involved acknowledging and processing the grief I felt about the loss of the marriage I had believed we were building together. The man I had loved and trusted had never actually existed. He had been a carefully constructed persona, designed to maintain my commitment, while David pursued his own interests, without regard for my well-being or Emma's needs. This realization required mourning not only the end of our relationship, but also the recognition that the foundation of love and partnership I had believed in had been largely illusory. However, this process of emotional preparation also revealed sources of strength and resilience that would prove essential in the coming weeks. The successful management of Emma's care during David's absence had demonstrated my capacity for effective single parenting. The systematic investigation that had uncovered his deception had shown my ability to gather information, analyze complex situations, and make strategic decisions under pressure. Most importantly, the clarity I had gained about David's true character had liberated me from the confusion and self-doubt that had characterized the previous weeks of trying to understand his changed behavior. During the final day before David's scheduled return, I received an unexpected phone call that would significantly influence my approach to our confrontation. My former supervisor at Microsoft called to inform me about a consulting opportunity that had emerged while I was on maternity leave. A major retail client was seeking expertise in supply chain optimization for their international expansion into Asian markets, and my specific combination of analytical skills and cultural knowledge made me an ideal candidate for the project. The consulting opportunity represented far more than simply a source of income during a potentially difficult period of separation and divorce proceedings. It would provide professional validation of my expertise, intellectual stimulation that had been absent during the intensive focus on infant care, and most importantly, a pathway toward financial independence that did not depend on David's income or support. The project scope involved developing comprehensive recommendations for streamlining distribution networks across multiple countries, implementing technology solutions that could improve inventory management and reduce shipping costs, and training client personnel in best practices for international logistics coordination. The work would require several months of intensive research and analysis, followed by an implementation phase that could extend the engagement for up to a year. The financial terms of the consulting arrangement were significantly more favorable than my previous salary at Microsoft, reflecting both the specialized nature of the expertise required and the premium rates that experienced consultants could command in the current market. The income from this single project would be sufficient to support Emma and me comfortably, while I developed additional consulting relationships or explored other professional opportunities. More importantly, the consulting opportunity represented a chance to build upon my existing expertise in ways that could lead to long-term career advancement and financial security that exceeded anything I could have achieved as a Microsoft employee. The project would provide exposure to senior executives at multiple companies, create opportunities for establishing ongoing consulting relationships, and demonstrate my ability to deliver high-value strategic guidance to major corporations. The timing of this opportunity, arriving just as I was preparing to confront David about his betrayal and potentially restructure my entire life, seemed almost providential. Rather than facing the prospect of financial dependence on someone who had demonstrated such profound untrustworthiness, I would be entering our confrontation from a position of professional strength and economic opportunity. I accepted the consulting engagement immediately, explaining that I would be available to begin work within 2 weeks of my maternity leave conclusion. This timeline would provide sufficient opportunity to resolve the immediate crisis in my marriage while ensuring that I had concrete plans for professional and financial independence, regardless of the outcome of my confrontation with David. The evening before David's scheduled return, I organized all the evidence I had gathered into a comprehensive presentation that would make denial or minimization impossible while providing clear documentation of the scope and duration of his deception. The presentation included the timeline analysis correlating his claimed activities with actual evidence, the social media photographs documenting his affair, the contradictory information from his office regarding his travel schedule, and the financial records showing discrepancies between his described business activities and his actual expenses. I also prepared talking points for our conversation that would focus on his intentions for our marriage and his level of commitment to rebuilding trust rather than simply cataloging his past deceptions. While accountability for his actions would be important, the more crucial question involved whether he was willing and able to make the changes necessary to restore our relationship, or whether he had already decided to pursue a future with someone else. The final element of my preparation involved making peace with the possibility that David might choose immediate separation rather than attempting to rebuild our marriage. While such an outcome would create significant challenges and require major adjustments to my plans and expectations, it would also provide clarity and allow me to begin building an independent life without the uncertainty and emotional stress of attempting to repair a relationship with someone who had demonstrated such profound dishonesty. As I completed these preparations and settled Emma for what might be our last night in the home we had shared as a family, I experienced a complex mixture of grief for what I was losing and excitement about the possibilities that lay ahead. The confrontation with David would be difficult and potentially devastating, but it would also mark the beginning of a new chapter in my life that could ultimately prove far more fulfilling than anything I could have achieved within the constraints of a marriage built on deception and betrayal. The woman who had been abandoned at an airport with her newborn daughter was about to emerge from this crisis, with capabilities, opportunities, and strength that would transform her life in ways that neither she nor David could currently imagine. David's return to Seattle occurred precisely according to his original schedule, with his flight arriving at SeaTac Airport at 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday evening in late April. I had spent the day implementing final preparations for our confrontation, while maintaining normal routines with Emma to preserve my emotional equilibrium during the hours leading up to what I anticipated would be the most difficult conversation of my life. The evidence presentation I had prepared was organized in my laptop, the legal consultation notes were readily accessible, and I had mentally rehearsed various approaches to initiating the discussion based on David's likely demeanor upon his return. When David entered our condominium at approximately 8:15 p.m., his behavior immediately confirmed that he had no awareness of my knowledge regarding his deceptive activities during the previous 2 weeks. He greeted me with casual affection, inquired about Emma's well-being with apparent genuine interest, and began unpacking his luggage while providing what appeared to be spontaneous commentary about his supposed business activities in California. His performance was so convincing that, had I not possessed irrefutable evidence to the contrary, I might have continued believing his fabricated explanations for his absence. The acquisition evaluation turned out to be even more complex than we initially anticipated, David explained, as he sorted through clothing that showed no evidence of intensive business activities. The target company's financial structure required extensive analysis of their supply chain partnerships, which is actually quite similar to the work you do at Microsoft. I found myself wishing I could have consulted with you on some of the logistics challenges we identified. This reference to supply chain analysis was particularly galling because it demonstrated his willingness to incorporate details from my professional expertise into his deceptive narrative. The casual manner in which he constructed lies that connected to my own work experience revealed a level of manipulation that extended beyond simple infidelity into systematic psychological deception designed to maintain my trust while he pursued his alternative relationship. I allowed David to continue his fabricated account of his California activities, while I observed his behavior for additional insights into his deceptive capabilities and his assessment of my likely responses to his explanations. His confidence in delivering false information suggested either complete certainty that his deception had been effective or a disturbing comfort level with sustained dishonesty in our most intimate relationship. After David had completed his initial narrative about the business trip and had settled into what appeared to be a relaxed evening routine, I introduced the topic that would expose the complete scope of his betrayal. My approach was deliberately measured and non-accusatory, designed to provide him with opportunities to acknowledge his deception voluntarily before I presented the comprehensive evidence I had gathered. "David, I need to discuss something important with you about your trip to California," I began, maintaining steady eye contact while keeping my voice calm and controlled. "I encountered some confusing information while you were away, and I would like to give you an opportunity to clarify the situation before I draw any conclusions about what might have occurred. David's initial response was one of polite curiosity mixed with slight concern, suggesting that he interpreted my comment as a reference to minor inconsistencies rather than fundamental deception. Of course, Victoria. What kind of confusing information? I hope there were not any problems with my travel arrangements or communication while I was working. His willingness to maintain his deceptive narrative even when presented with a clear opportunity to acknowledge problems demonstrated the depth of his commitment to concealing his actual activities. This response confirmed that he had no intention of voluntarily admitting his affair or his systematic dishonesty. Regardless of how I approached the conversation, I proceeded to present the evidence I had gathered in a logical sequence that would make denial increasingly difficult, while providing multiple opportunities for David to acknowledge his deception and accept responsibility for his actions. My first revelation involved the contradictory information I had received from his office regarding his travel schedule and current work assignments. When I called your office to confirm your return date, Jennifer informed me that you were not scheduled for any extended travel during this period, I explained, watching carefully for his reaction to this information. She also mentioned that your current project assignments are focused on technology sector analysis being conducted entirely from the Seattle office. Could you help me understand how this information might be reconciled with your descriptions of the California acquisition evaluation? David's response to this revelation demonstrated both his continued commitment to deception and his skill at constructing plausible explanations for contradictory evidence. Rather than acknowledging any inconsistency, he immediately developed an alternative narrative that attempted to account for the discrepancy while maintaining his essential claims about work-related travel. That is a misunderstanding that probably resulted from confidentiality requirements surrounding the acquisition target, David explained with apparent confidence. Jennifer would not have access to information about special assignments that involve sensitive client relationships. The acquisition evaluation was being managed through a separate reporting structure that maintains strict confidentiality until the transaction reaches a more advanced stage. This response was sophisticated enough to seem plausible to someone without access to additional contradictory evidence. But it also demonstrated David's willingness to implicate his assistant in professional incompetence, rather than acknowledge any truthfulness issues with his own statements. The casual manner in which he constructed this additional layer of deception while sitting in our living room holding our daughter revealed a disturbing disconnect between his claimed values and his actual behavior. I continued with the second element of evidence, which involved the location data that contradicted his descriptions of business activities and meeting locations. This information would be more difficult for David to explain away through references to confidentiality requirements or administrative misunderstandings. I also noticed some inconsistencies in the location information from your phone during the trip, I continued, maintaining my measured tone despite the growing anger I felt about his continued willingness to lie directly to my face. The GPS data suggested that you were spending considerable time in residential and entertainment areas rather than business districts where corporate meetings would typically occur. Additionally, your movement patterns appeared more consistent with leisure activities than with the intensive work schedule you described during our phone conversations. David's response to this more specific evidence showed the first signs of defensive reaction, though he continued attempting to provide explanations that would preserve his deceptive narrative. His discomfort with the precision of the location data was evident in his shifted body language, and the increased time he required to formulate his response. The client preferred to conduct some of our discussions in informal settings rather than traditional office environments, David replied, though his voice carried less conviction than his previous explanations. Many of the acquisition evaluation meetings took place in residential areas where the target company executives lived, and some of our analytical work was completed in hotel conference rooms located in neighborhoods that might appear to be primarily residential. This explanation was clearly improvised and lacked the detailed confidence that had characterized his earlier responses. The suggestion that major acquisition evaluations would be conducted in residential neighborhoods strained credibility beyond what any reasonable person would accept, indicating that David was beginning to recognize the inadequacy of his deceptive strategies. At this point in our conversation, I made the decision to present the photographic evidence that would make continued denial impossible, while revealing the true nature of his activities during his supposed business trip. The social media photographs documenting his romantic involvement with another woman represented irrefutable proof of his infidelity and the complete fabrication of his business-related explanations. I opened my laptop and displayed the first photograph, which showed David and an unknown woman holding hands while walking along a beach in Santa Monica. The image was date-stamped during the second week of his trip, at a time when he had claimed to be conducting intensive financial analysis of acquisition targets. "David, I need you to explain this photograph and help me understand how it relates to your acquisition evaluation activities," I said, turning the laptop screen toward him while maintaining direct eye contact to observe his reaction to being confronted with undeniable evidence of his deception. The change in David's demeanor upon seeing the photograph was immediate and profound. The confident composure he had maintained throughout the earlier portions of our conversation disappeared entirely, replaced by obvious shock and the recognition that his elaborate deceptive strategy had been completely exposed. For several moments he stared at the screen without speaking, apparently processing the implications of my possession of this evidence. When David finally responded, his approach shifted dramatically from attempted explanation to damage control. Rather than continuing to deny his affair or attempting to provide additional fabricated justifications for his behavior, he immediately began trying to minimize the significance of his actions and to shift the conversation toward the practical implications for our marriage. "Victoria, I can see that you have discovered information about my relationship with Rachel," David said, using the name of his affair partner for the first time in our conversation. "I want you to know that this situation developed in ways that I never intended, and that my feelings for you and Emma have not changed despite the mistakes I have made." This response was remarkable for several reasons. First, David's immediate acknowledgement of the relationship upon being presented with photographic evidence suggested that he had been prepared for the possibility of discovery and had developed contingency strategies for managing such a situation. Second, his characterization of the affair as a situation that developed, rather than a deliberate choice, attempted to minimize his personal responsibility for the systematic deception he had engaged in over several months. Third, his claim that his feelings for Emma and me had not changed despite his actions demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of how betrayal and dishonesty affect trust and emotional connection in intimate relationships. I proceeded to display additional photographs that documented the extent and duration of David's relationship with Rachel, including images from multiple social events, romantic dinners, and vacation activities that had occurred during various periods when he had claimed to be engaged in work-related travel. The comprehensive nature of this evidence made clear that his affair was not a recent development or a temporary lapse in judgment, but rather an ongoing relationship that had been maintained through systematic deception over several months. These photographs span a period of at least 6 months, including times when I was pregnant with Emma and during the weeks following her birth, I observed, maintaining my analytical approach despite the emotional devastation of seeing documented proof of his betrayal during the most vulnerable periods of my life. "Your relationship with Rachel appears to have been ongoing throughout some of the most important milestones in our family's development." David's response to this broader evidence of his extended deception revealed both his recognition that denial was no longer possible and his complete lack of genuine accountability for the harm his actions had caused. Rather than expressing remorse for the betrayal or acknowledging the impact of his deception on my well-being and Emma's security, he immediately began attempting to negotiate the terms of how we would address the situation going forward. "I understand that you are hurt and angry about this discovery," David said, adopting a tone that suggested he viewed our conversation as a business negotiation rather than a discussion about fundamental violations of our marriage vows. "I think we need to consider how to handle this situation in a way that protects Emma's interests while allowing both of us to move forward with our lives." The casual manner in which David transitioned from systematic deception to practical discussions about handling the situation demonstrated a profound disconnect from the emotional and moral dimensions of what he had done to our family. His immediate focus on protecting Emma's interests, while superficially appropriate, seemed primarily designed to establish himself as a reasonable and concerned father rather than to acknowledge the harm his actions had caused to her security and well-being. I responded to David's attempt to control the direction of our conversation by presenting the final element of evidence I had prepared, which involved documentation of the financial costs associated with his affair and the systematic lies he had told about his work activities. This information would be crucial for any legal proceedings related to divorce and property division, but it also served to illustrate the comprehensive nature of his betrayal of our partnership. Before we discuss how to move forward, I need you to understand the full scope of what I have discovered about your activities, I continued, displaying bank statements and credit card records that showed expenses related to his relationship with Rachel. Your affair has involved not only emotional and physical betrayal, but also the misuse of our shared financial resources to support a relationship that violated our marriage commitments. The financial evidence showed expensive dinners, hotel accommodations, jewelry purchases, and travel expenses that David had concealed through various deceptive strategies, including the use of business expense accounts for personal activities and the creation of fabricated explanations for unusual charges on our shared credit cards. The total amount involved was substantial enough to affect our family's financial security and represented a theft of resources that should have been used for Emma's care and our household needs. David's response to this financial evidence marked the point at which his demeanor shifted from attempted damage control to open hostility. The recognition that I had conducted a comprehensive investigation into all aspects of his deception, rather than simply discovering isolated evidence of his affair, appeared to threaten his ability to maintain any semblance of control over the situation. Victoria, I think you are overreacting to a situation that can be resolved through mature discussion and reasonable compromises, David said, his voice taking on an edge of irritation that I had never previously heard in our most difficult conversations. Many couples work through infidelity issues without destroying their families or engaging in vindictive behavior that serves no constructive purpose. This characterization of my evidence gathering as overreacting and vindictive behavior revealed David's complete inability to accept responsibility for the consequences of his own choices. His suggestion that infidelity was a common marital challenge that could be resolved through reasonable compromises demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of the trust foundation necessary for successful marriage and his role in destroying that foundation through sustained deception. The confrontation continued for several more hours, during which David alternated between attempts to minimize his betrayal, expressions of anger about my investigation into his activities, and various proposals for how we might restructure our marriage to accommodate his relationship with Rachel. His suggestions included arrangements where he would maintain relationships with both women, geographic separations that would allow him to pursue his affair while preserving the appearance of our marriage, and financial agreements that would protect his interests while limiting my access to marital assets. Each of these proposals revealed the depth of David's selfishness and his complete inability to comprehend the moral and emotional dimensions of what he had done to our family. His focus remained entirely on protecting his own interests and maintaining his access to both relationships rather than acknowledging the harm he had caused or accepting responsibility for repairing the damage to our marriage. As our confrontation reached its conclusion in the early hours of Friday morning, it became clear that David had no intention of ending his affair or making the changes necessary to rebuild trust in our marriage. His proposals for moving forward all involved arrangements that would allow him to continue his relationship with Rachel, while maintaining some connection to Emma and me that would serve his interests without requiring him to accept the consequences of his betrayal. The conversation ended with David's announcement that he would be returning to Los Angeles the following week to, quote, finalize some business arrangements and to, quote, determine the best path forward for everyone involved. His language carefully avoided direct acknowledgement that he was choosing Rachel over our family, but his intentions were unmistakably clear. The devastating revelation of David's complete betrayal and his unwillingness to accept responsibility for repairing our marriage had provided the clarity I needed to move forward with confidence in my decision to build an independent life for Emma and myself. The man I had trusted with our future had revealed himself to be fundamentally unworthy of that trust. But his betrayal had also liberated me to pursue opportunities that would ultimately prove far more valuable than anything we could have achieved together. The 48 hours following my confrontation with David revealed layers of deception that extended far beyond the affair itself, exposing a systematic pattern of manipulation that had been undermining our marriage for nearly a year. As I conducted a comprehensive review of our financial records, communication patterns, and shared activities during recent months, the evidence revealed that virtually every aspect of our relationship had been corrupted by David's duplicity and his calculated preparation for abandoning our family. My analysis began with a detailed examination of our joint financial accounts, which revealed spending patterns and monetary transfers that David had concealed through sophisticated accounting strategies designed to hide the true cost of his relationship with Rachel. The expenses I had initially discovered represented merely the visible portion of a much larger financial betrayal that involved the systematic diversion of our shared resources to support his alternative lifestyle. Credit card statements from the previous 8 months showed regular charges at high-end restaurants in Los Angeles during periods when David had claimed to be working late at the Seattle office. Hotel accommodations at luxury resorts during weekends when he had told me he was attending business conferences or meeting with clients. Jewelry purchases from exclusive boutiques that had never resulted in gifts for me, indicating that expensive items had been purchased for Rachel using money that should have been allocated to our household expenses and Emma's future needs. The most disturbing financial discovery involved David's creation of a separate checking account that he had funded through systematic transfers from our joint savings. This account, which I discovered through careful analysis of bank statements and electronic transfer records, contained over $37,000 that had been diverted from the college fund we had established for Emma and the emergency reserves we had accumulated for unexpected family expenses. The existence of this secret account represented more than simple financial dishonesty. The funds had been accumulated through deliberate deception over several months, with transfers typically occurring on days when David knew I would be focused on work deadlines or other commitments that would prevent me from immediately reviewing our account activity. The timing and amounts of these transfers indicated careful planning and premeditation rather than impulsive decisions made during the course of his affair. Further investigation revealed that David had used this secret account to finance not only his relationship with Rachel, but also his preparation for permanent separation from our family. Bank records showed payments to a Los Angeles apartment rental agency, utility deposits for establishing services at a new residence, and consultation fees paid to a California divorce attorney who specialized in minimizing financial obligations to former spouses. This evidence made clear that David's affair was not a temporary lapse in judgment that had evolved unexpectedly into a serious relationship. Instead, his involvement with Rachel had been planned from the beginning as a replacement for our marriage, with systematic preparation for abandoning Emma and me occurring simultaneously with his expressions of love and commitment to our family. The discovery of David's advanced planning for divorce proceedings was particularly devastating because it revealed the calculated nature of his deception during some of our most intimate moments together. His enthusiastic participation in preparing for Emma's birth, his expressions of joy during her delivery, and his discussions about our future as a family had all occurred while he was actively planning to leave us for another woman. My investigation into David's communication patterns revealed additional evidence of the sophisticated deception he had employed to maintain both relationships simultaneously. Analysis of his phone records, email accounts, and social media activity showed that he had been maintaining daily contact with Rachel throughout my pregnancy and during the weeks following Emma's birth, often communicating with her immediately before or after intimate conversations with me about our family's future. The content of these communications, which I was able to access through shared digital accounts that David had apparently forgotten to secure, revealed the extent to which he had been sharing details about our private life with Rachel, while simultaneously deceiving both of us about his intentions and commitments. Messages showed him complaining about the responsibilities of fatherhood, expressing resentment about the changes in our lifestyle following Emma's birth, and discussing strategies for extricating himself from our marriage without significant financial consequences. One particularly revealing series of messages occurred during the week following Emma's birth, when David had appeared to be completely engaged with supporting my recovery and bonding with our daughter. While he was publicly celebrating our family milestone and receiving congratulations from friends and colleagues, he was privately assuring Rachel that his family responsibilities would not interfere with their relationship, and that he was developing plans for permanent relocation to Los Angeles. These communications revealed that David's resentment toward family responsibilities had begun during my pregnancy rather than developing gradually after Emma's birth. His expressions of excitement about becoming a father and his participation in preparing for our daughter's arrival had been performance designed to maintain my trust, while he pursued his primary objective of building a future with Rachel. The depth of David's deception became even more apparent when I discovered that he had been systematically documenting what he perceived as my shortcomings as a wife and mother, apparently preparing evidence that could be used to support claims about my unsuitability for primary custody of Emma. His private notes, which I found on his personal laptop, contained detailed records of times when I had been tired or stressed during the challenging early weeks of motherhood, instances when Emma had been fussy or difficult to soothe, and my occasional expressions of frustration about the demands of caring for a newborn while recovering from childbirth. These notes revealed David's intention to characterize the normal challenges of early parenthood as evidence of my inability to provide adequate care for Emma. His documentation strategy suggested that he had been planning not only to abandon our family but also to seek custody arrangements that would minimize his financial obligations while portraying himself as the more stable and capable parent. The discovery of this documentation strategy was particularly infuriating because it demonstrated David's willingness to exploit my vulnerability during one of the most challenging periods of my life for his strategic advantage in future legal proceedings. Rather than providing the support and partnership that new mothers require, he had been collecting evidence that could be used to undermine my parental rights and financial security. My review of David's professional activities during recent months revealed that his claimed increased work responsibilities had been largely fabricated to provide cover for his relationship with Rachel and his preparation for relocating to Los Angeles. Conversations with his colleagues and analysis of his actual project assignments showed that his workload had not increased significantly during the period when he had been claiming exceptional time demands that prevented him from participating in family responsibilities. The business trips that David had described as essential for his career advancement had often been personal vacations with Rachel that he had disguised as work obligations. The client meetings and analytical projects that had supposedly required extended hours had frequently been fictional activities designed to justify his absence from our home during times when he was actually with Rachel or preparing for his eventual departure. This pattern of professional deception extended to David's interactions with his supervisors and colleagues at Goldman Sachs, whom he had apparently been misleading about his family situation and personal commitments. His performance at work had begun to decline during recent months, not due to the increased demands he had claimed, but because of his divided attention between his job responsibilities and his personal agenda of establishing a new life in California. The implications of David's professional deception extended beyond the immediate impact on our marriage to potential consequences for his career and reputation. His willingness to lie to colleagues and supervisors about his activities and commitments suggested a pattern of dishonesty that could ultimately undermine his professional standing and financial prospects, which would in turn affect his ability to provide support for Emma regardless of our custody arrangements. During this period of discovery and analysis, I also uncovered evidence that David had been actively undermining my own professional relationships and opportunities in ways designed to increase my financial dependence on him. Shortly before my maternity leave began, David had contacted my supervisor at Microsoft to express concerns about my ability to manage both career responsibilities and motherhood effectively, suggesting that reduced work commitments would be beneficial for our family's well-being. These communications, which David had never discussed with me, had apparently influenced decisions about project assignments and advancement opportunities that would have been available upon my return from maternity leave. His interference in my career development had been motivated not by genuine concern for my well-being, but by his desire to ensure that I would be financially vulnerable and unable to support Emma independently when he chose to abandon our marriage. The discovery of David's sabotage of my professional prospects was particularly devastating because it revealed the extent to which he had been systematically preparing to leave me in a position where I would be forced to accept whatever custody and financial arrangements he chose to offer. His strategy had involved not only building his own escape plan, but also actively undermining my ability to create alternatives that would protect Emma's interests and my own independence. However, alongside the emotional devastation of discovering the comprehensive nature of David's betrayal, this evidence also provided valuable insights into his character and strategic thinking that would prove essential for protecting my interests in the challenging weeks ahead. His sophisticated deception and advanced planning revealed that he was far more calculating and ruthless than I had previously understood, but it also demonstrated that his strategies could be anticipated and countered through equally systematic preparation. The documentation of David's financial deception, professional lies, and deliberate sabotage of my career provided substantial evidence that would be valuable in any legal proceedings related to divorce and custody arrangements. More importantly, understanding the scope of his planning and the timeline of his deception enabled me to develop comprehensive strategies for protecting Emma's welfare and securing our financial independence. The consulting opportunity that had emerged, just as I was discovering David's betrayal, now appeared even more significant as a pathway toward economic security that could not be undermined by his manipulation or sabotage. The project would provide not only immediate income but also professional validation and network development that could lead to long-term career advancement beyond anything I could have achieved, while constrained by David's subtle but systematic efforts to limit my independence. My analysis of the evidence revealed that David's departure was now inevitable and imminent, regardless of any discussions about reconciliation or family preservation that might occur during the coming days. His advanced preparation for relocation to Los Angeles, his consultation with divorce attorneys, and his systematic documentation of perceived evidence against my parental capabilities indicated that he had already made irreversible commitments to abandoning our marriage. This recognition provided clarity about my priorities and objectives during the period leading up to his departure. Rather than attempting to salvage a relationship that David had already chosen to end months earlier, I could focus entirely on preparing for independent success that would ensure Emma's security and demonstrate my capability to thrive without his support or partnership. The comprehensive nature of David's deception had revealed his true character and eliminated any remaining doubt about the wisdom of building a future that did not depend on his participation or commitment. The man who had been willing to systematically steal from his own daughter's college fund and sabotage his wife's career while maintaining expressions of love and partnership was fundamentally untrustworthy and incapable of the integrity required for successful marriage and parenthood. However, the same evidence that documented David's betrayal also revealed opportunities for growth and achievement that would ultimately prove far more valuable than anything our marriage could have provided. His manipulation and sabotage had been designed to limit my independence and increase my vulnerability, but they had inadvertently prepared me to recognize and seize opportunities for success that I might never have pursued within the comfortable but constraining framework of our partnership. The foundation of trust that had supported our relationship had been completely destroyed by David's systematic deception, but from its ruins I was beginning to construct something far more substantial and enduring. The strength, analytical capability, and determination that I had demonstrated during this period of discovery would prove essential for building the extraordinary success that would eventually shock David when he witnessed my arrival in the private jet at the same airport where he was about to abandon Emma and me. The weekend following my discovery of David's comprehensive betrayal marked the beginning of an emotional and psychological transformation that would prove crucial to my ability to build extraordinary success from the ruins of our marriage. While David remained in our condominium making final preparations for what he had announced would be his, quote, business trip to finalize arrangements in Los Angeles, I underwent a profound internal reckoning with the implications of his deception and the opportunities that lay ahead for Emma and me. The initial emotional response to understanding the full scope of David's betrayal was a complex mixture of grief, rage, and profound disappointment that required careful processing to prevent these feelings from overwhelming my capacity for strategic thinking and effective action. The man I had loved and trusted for 5 years had revealed himself to be fundamentally different from the person I had believed him to be, requiring me to mourn not only the end of our marriage, but also the recognition that the foundation of love and partnership I had invested in had been largely illusory. The grief I experienced was multifaceted, encompassing loss of the future we had planned together, the security I had believed our partnership provided, and the shared vision of family life that had motivated many of my major decisions during recent years. The recognition that David's expressions of love and commitment had been performance rather than genuine emotion required a complete reassessment of memories and experiences that I had treasured as evidence of our strong relationship. However, alongside this natural grief response, I experienced a growing sense of clarity and liberation that would prove far more significant for my future development. David's systematic deception had freed me from obligations and constraints that had been limiting my potential without my full recognition. The comfortable but ultimately restrictive framework of our marriage had prevented me from considering opportunities for professional and personal growth that would have seemed too risky or ambitious, while I was committed to supporting our shared lifestyle and future plans. The consulting opportunity that had emerged during this crisis now appeared not as temporary employment during a difficult period, but as the beginning of a career trajectory that could lead to achievements far beyond anything I could have pursued within the constraints of our marriage. The specialized expertise I had developed in supply chain optimization represented a valuable asset in the global economy, and the freedom to pursue consulting relationships without considering David's preferences or our shared financial obligations opened possibilities for international projects and strategic partnerships that had previously seemed impractical. During the quiet hours while Emma slept and David was absent from our home, I began developing a comprehensive vision for the independent life I would build following his departure. This planning process required honest assessment of my strengths, resources, and objectives, while acknowledging the challenges I would face as a single mother entering a competitive consulting market. My professional capabilities included not only technical expertise in supply chain management, but also analytical skills, project management experience, and cultural knowledge that would be valuable for companies seeking to optimize their international operations. The successful completion of my advanced degree, my track record at Microsoft, and the consulting project I had already secured provided a foundation of credibility that could support the development of additional client relationships. The financial resources available to me included the compensation from my current consulting engagement, accumulated savings that David had not yet discovered or diverted to his secret accounts, and potential settlements from divorce proceedings that would be influenced by the evidence of his financial deception and abandonment of family responsibilities. While these resources were limited compared to the dual-income lifestyle David and I had previously maintained, they were sufficient to support Emma and me during the period required to establish a sustainable independent income. More importantly, the emotional and psychological resources I had discovered during this crisis exceeded anything I had previously recognized within myself. The strength I had demonstrated while managing Emma's care independently, the analytical capability I had employed to uncover David's deception, and the strategic thinking I had applied to evidence gathering and legal consultation revealed capacities for leadership and problem-solving that could be leveraged for professional success. The process of emotional reckoning also involved confronting and overcoming the self-doubt and diminished confidence that David's manipulation had been designed to create. His systematic undermining of my professional relationships and his subtle but persistent suggestions that motherhood would compromise my career effectiveness had been intended to increase my dependence on his support, while reducing my belief in my own capabilities. Recognizing these manipulation tactics for what they were enabled me to reject the limiting beliefs David had attempted to instill, and to reclaim confidence in my ability to excel professionally while providing excellent care for Emma. The successful management of her needs during his recent absence had demonstrated that single parenthood was not only feasible but could actually provide a more stable and nurturing environment than the tension-filled household that had existed while David's deception created underlying stress and conflict. The emotional reckoning process also included developing a framework for understanding David's betrayal that would enable me to learn from the experience without allowing bitterness or resentment to compromise my future relationships and opportunities. While his actions had been inexcusable and harmful, they had also provided valuable lessons about character assessment, trust development, and the importance of maintaining individual identity and capabilities within committed partnerships. The sophisticated nature of David's deception had revealed warning signs that I had minimized or rationalized during the months when his behavior had been changing. His increasing focus on his individual career advancement at the expense of family priorities, his reduced emotional availability during my pregnancy and early motherhood, and his defensive responses to questions about his activities had all been indicators that should have prompted earlier investigation and confrontation. Understanding these warning signs would prove valuable for future relationship decisions. But more immediately, the analytical skills I had developed during my investigation of David's deception could be applied to business relationships and professional opportunities. The ability to gather comprehensive information, identify inconsistencies and explanations, and document evidence systematically would be essential capabilities for consulting work that involved evaluating client operations and developing strategic recommendations. During this period of emotional processing and strategic planning, I also began developing the psychological resilience that would be necessary for building extraordinary success in a competitive professional environment. The devastation of discovering David's betrayal and the challenge of rebuilding my life as a single mother represented a form of stress testing that revealed my capacity to function effectively under extreme pressure while maintaining focus on long-term objectives. The consulting project I had accepted would require me to analyze complex supply chain operations across multiple countries, identify optimization opportunities that could generate significant cost savings for the client, and present recommendations to senior executives who would evaluate my expertise based on the quality and practical value of my analysis. The intellectual rigor and professional confidence required for this work were precisely the qualities I had been developing during my investigation of David's deception and my planning for independent success. The emotional transformation I was experiencing also included a fundamental shift in my assessment of risk and opportunity that would prove crucial for entrepreneurial success. The comfortable security I had believed our marriage provided had been revealed as illusory, demonstrating that apparent stability could mask underlying vulnerabilities that were outside my control. This recognition freed me to pursue opportunities that involved greater uncertainty but also greater potential for achievement and independence. The consulting market offered possibilities for building a practice that could generate income far exceeding what I could earn as a Microsoft employee, but it also involved risks related to client acquisition, project delivery, and market competition. The emotional strength I had developed during this crisis provided confidence that I could manage these risks effectively, while building the professional reputation necessary for long-term success. As David prepared for his departure to Los Angeles, his behavior during our final days together revealed additional insights into his character that reinforced my conviction that his abandonment represented an opportunity rather than a loss. His focus remained entirely on protecting his own interests and minimizing the practical inconvenience of ending our marriage, with no apparent concern for Emma's welfare or recognition of the harm his deception had caused to our family. His conversations with me during this period were characterized by attempts to establish narrative control over the situation, portraying his departure as a mutual decision motivated by incompatible goals rather than as abandonment and betrayal. David's efforts to reframe his actions as reasonable responses to natural relationship evolution demonstrated his continued commitment to deception and manipulation, even when the truth had been fully exposed. The contrast between David's self-serving rationalizations and the genuine care and concern I felt for Emma's well-being highlighted the fundamental difference in our characters and values. While he was focused on minimizing his obligations and protecting his comfort, I was developing comprehensive strategies for ensuring our daughter's security and creating opportunities for her future success. This difference in priorities and values extended to our respective approaches to professional development and achievement. David's career ambitions were motivated primarily by personal status and financial reward, while my emerging vision for consulting success was grounded in the desire to create value for clients while building capabilities that could support Emma's education and opportunities. The emotional reckoning process culminated in a profound sense of gratitude for the opportunity to discover my true capabilities and potential for achievement that might never have been revealed within the constraints of our marriage. David's betrayal had forced me to confront challenges and develop strengths that could serve as the foundation for extraordinary success, while his departure would eliminate the limiting factors that had prevented me from pursuing ambitious professional goals. The woman who would eventually emerge from this crisis would possess analytical capabilities, emotional resilience, strategic thinking skills, and unwavering determination that could be leveraged for achievements far beyond anything David could imagine. His decision to abandon Emma and me would ultimately prove to be the catalyst for transformation that enabled success he could never have achieved himself. During the final evening before David's departure for Los Angeles, I experienced a moment of complete clarity about the future I would build and the principles that would guide my efforts. The consulting project would serve as the foundation for developing a practice that could grow into a comprehensive supply chain optimization firm, serving multinational corporations across various industries. The expertise I would develop through this work could eventually lead to opportunities for strategic partnerships, acquisition of smaller consulting firms, and possibly the development of proprietary technology solutions that could be licensed to companies worldwide. The vision I developed during this emotional reckoning process extended beyond professional success to encompass the creation of generational wealth that would provide Emma with opportunities and security that exceeded anything David and I could have achieved together. The strength and determination I had discovered during this crisis would enable me to build something extraordinary from the devastation he had created, transforming his betrayal into the foundation for triumph that would eventually shock him when he witnessed the full extent of what I had accomplished independently. The emotional reckoning had prepared me not only to survive David's abandonment, but to thrive beyond his most optimistic projections for his own future, setting the stage for the extraordinary success that would culminate in my arrival at the airport in a private jet that represented achievement he could never have imagined possible. The Monday morning following David's departure to Los Angeles marked the beginning of my transformation from emotional processing to strategic implementation of the comprehensive plan I had developed for building independent success. David had left our Seattle condominium with 2 suitcases and vague promises to maintain communication about Emma's welfare, but his behavior during the final days before his departure had made clear that his primary focus remained on establishing his new life with Rachel, rather than fulfilling his responsibilities as a father and former husband. His departure provided the clarity and emotional space necessary for me to begin executing the systematic approach I had developed for establishing financial independence, while providing exceptional care for Emma. The consulting project that would serve as the foundation for my professional transformation was scheduled to begin within 10 days, requiring immediate preparation and strategic positioning that would determine the success of this crucial initial engagement. The client for my first independent consulting project was Meridian Global Retail, a mid-sized company that operated specialty clothing stores across 8 countries in Asia and was experiencing significant challenges with their international supply chain efficiency. Their distribution networks had evolved organically as they expanded into new markets, resulting in redundant processes, inefficient transportation routes, and inventory management systems that created substantial unnecessary costs while reducing customer satisfaction through delayed deliveries and frequent stockouts. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.